Thinking about my life, I consider I've had a very, very interesting, unusual and very challenging life, and I think it's made me the person that I am. The first two orphanages I remember, I doubt if I'd have been 5 or 6, and David would have been very young and Ron, of course, a bit older. But I can remember standing at this glass door and watching my mother walking down this road and getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the feeling of absolute abandonment was just shocking. And they'd taken Brother Ron and David to the boys' area and I was there alone, and it was I can remember the tears just coming down, and it was just a feeling of being totally and completely abandoned. And then the other thing I remember was I had chicken pox, and I can remember them sitting me on a table and putting this Band-Aid and pulling this big strip of plaster right across here, which is still left minute scars on my face there. We had Christmas celebration and all the children were given a penny, which to us was in those days a lot of money. And then they came around and collected all the money from them for the children of the poor children. So we had nothing. But anyway, that was just the very early days there. 1942, the Jap subs moved into Sydney Harbour, and we were obviously living somewhere on the harbour, and we were evacuated out of Sydney. And I can remember very, very clearly waiting on Sydney Central Railway Station for the train to take us to the country. The train to Narrandera, I can't remember the journey, but I gather it would have been a very long, tiresome journey. I can remember being in Leeton, living in the veranda of an old hotel. And I think at that time Mum must have applied, she was working in the Leeton Cannery. And I think at that time she probably applied for a soldier settlement home, which were just on the market at that stage in Leeton, and she was able to choose a brand new 3-bedroom home in Leeton, to which we moved into possibly the first time we had ever been in a home, because we'd been in rooms and things like that. So there we were in this brand new, beautiful home, fully electric, and Mum was working at the Leeton Hospital, and I went to school there, and eventually she found she couldn't afford the rent because it was too much for her with just being on her own. So she took in a young couple with a baby as boarders, which was totally illegal. So she was forced out of that situation and had to leave. And I think that was when she applied for her job as cottage mother in Fairbridge. And we arrived in Fairbridge just prior to Christmas. And I can remember most vividly being in this huge, huge hall with the tallest Christmas tree I've ever, even taller than that one there, bigger than that. And to me, it was the most incredible, amazing sight to see this beautifully decorated Christmas tree in this huge hall. And fortunately, when I left school, I was able to apply for a job as a nursemaid down at Barrel in Hopewood House. So I was there from the time I left school at 15 to nearly 16. And Mother, of course, realised that there was no future for me there, that I was just going to be a nurse assistant. And she made inquiries through beautiful Harry for me to get war service and legacy help to get me to college in Sydney. And it was through Harry and Mum that I was able to do the most wonderful thing I'd ever wanted to do, and become a kindergarten teacher. So that was Newtown, Sydney, and I had 3 years living as a boarder in Newtown, and we used to walk to the college in McDonaldtown. And it was at that time that Brother Ron and Cyril, and of course Cyril had been my hero from the time I was about 12, he and Ron were doing national service. So my girlfriend and I and Cyril and Ron would meet up every weekend in Sydney. One night Cyril walked me to the hostel door and I just said goodnight to him, and he said to me, "Don't I get a kiss goodnight?" And I was just absolutely gobsmacked. And I literally floated up the stairs to the bedroom, and one of the girls said, "What on earth has happened to you?" And I just said, "I've just been kissed by Cyril." So it started a beautiful friendship with Cyril, which was more than just a friendship. He'd just joined the Air Force. Some months later, he was chosen to go with the 78th Fighter Wing to Malta for 2.5 years. So we had an understanding that during that time we'd write to each other as more than friends. And I was then working as a direct teacher at the Redfern Kindergarten, which was quite even in those days, Redfern was not a nice place for a single young girl to be living in. So I didn't go out at night at all. I stayed in my little pokey room doing my embroidery for my glory box. And Cyril must have realised that I wasn't having any sort of social life. So he didn't break off the friendship, but he said, "Let's just forget about any commitments. You go wherever you want to, and I will too." So I was literally crushed, because I knew that from the time I was quite young that he was my hero. And I can remember going to Mum at Fairbridge and crying all the way from Sydney to Molong, because I'd been rejected, and it was so embarrassing. And we lost touch with Cyril. I decided I was going to be a career woman. Men, no more men. Anyway, in the May holidays, Mum and I had planned to have a week's holiday in Sydney together. She was still at Fairbridge and I was in Nambour teaching at the kindergarten. So we had this holiday planned, and I'm standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus to take me through to Central, to the station in Brisbane. And one of the girls comes running up from the flat with a telegram from Mum. And I opened it up. "Cyril meet train Central Railway, love Mum." Well, apparently Mum had had a dream. She dreamt she'd had a letter from him, and a week later a letter came from him. And this was divine intervention, saying that he'd like to meet up with us again and could, she had promptly sent off a telegram saying that we would be in Sydney for a week at such and such a time. So there I was. I thought I looked very, very, very chic in my black overcoat and whatever. Stepped off the train, and here's Cyril there, and it was just, for me, it was just the most wonderful thing. He drove me to Manly and proposed at Manly that night. And I was so surprised. I said, "I beg your pardon," which wasn't quite the answer he'd been hoping for. So anyway, we went back, and of course Mum was thrilled because she had always wanted me and Cyril to become serious. She loved Cyril like a son. So anyway, the next day we went and bought the engagement ring. And I had left Nambour.
Said yes in the meantime.
Oh yes, I did. Yes, I'd left Nambour as a single career woman and determined to do this course and go across and be. I came home wearing an engagement ring, and the committee and the parents at the kindergarten couldn't work out what had happened. So when I told them the story, they were all absolutely thrilled. So we set our wedding date for the 22nd of November that year, and Mum, in her wisdom, said to me, "You've seen little of Cyril over a period of 6 years. I think you should leave your job in Nambour and go to Sale, Victoria, where he had his little business down there, and that's where we had planned to live as a couple, in Sale, Victoria. Each day I'd go down to Cyril's flat, and I'd do his cleaning and his washing and cook his meal. When I was teaching in Beaudesert, which was 1955 or 56, I actually started the kindergarten in Beaudesert. As I say, I was there and I bought myself a Lambretta, one of the first ones to come into the country. Beautiful Lambretta. It was the top of the beautiful. I had my Lambretta and I used to go to Brisbane and back, which was quite a hike. I can remember going to have a music concert and coming back quite late at night with a girlfriend sitting pillion. My mum used to ride pillion when I went from Beaudesert to Tenterfield. I stayed overnight at Tenterfield. I left at 4 o'clock in the morning, went to Gunnedah, stayed overnight at Gunnedah, crossed the Oxley Highway, which was just dirt. There was no bitumen, and for a person on a two-wheel Lambretta to drive on dirt road is not easy. And I'd have to stop the vehicle, push it into the next rut, where the car rut, and that's what. Travelling along on my own, and came to the mountain area. Big shadow across the road, but it wasn't a shadow, it was a ditch. And I went into it with the Lambretta, no phones, nothing. And again, divine intervention, nothing broken. And I got into Gilgandra.
How'd you get over the ditch?
Oh, you just don't ask me how, you don't know, you do these things, my love.
Yeah. Divine intervention.
And I got to Gilgandra and went to this service station and told this fellow what had happened, and he was so kind to me. He sent me in and made a cup of tea, gave me some food, because I was, by that time the shock had set in. He checked over that motor scooter completely and thoroughly and wouldn't charge me at all. So eventually I arrived at Fairbridge, and of course Mum didn't know that I had a motor scooter. It was a surprise. She was expecting me the next day on the train. So I arrived up on the motor scooter and Ronnie, Beryl. In the meantime, Cyril and I were planning our wedding. We were getting married then. So we had the Lambretta, and I thought he would have been happy to have had the Lambretta, but he refused to use it. It wouldn't sit pillion, so I had to sell my Lambretta. But anyhow, we met up in Sydney with the family and got married at that beautiful church at Vaucluse, which is, yes, St Michael's at Vaucluse, and we were married there. The day before our wedding, we had a telegram from his partner in business down in Sale saying, suggest cancel honeymoon if value job. Now Cyril was the sort of person that didn't like being told what to do. And as he'd put up the money for this business, he sent back the telegram, remember past financial favours don't value job. So there we were on the Friday before our wedding on the Saturday with literally no future. So anyway, we came back up to Nambour, and one of the lovely parents at the kindergarten had given us the use of his beautiful holiday house at Alexander Headlands as a wedding present for 2 weeks. And we started our married life there. A couple of days after we were there, there'd been quite a severe storm coming into the coast, and they were advising people to make sure that their boats and things were all securely anchored. And friends of ours had had a big 20-foot yacht, and they'd had it beached while they were repainting it. And Cyril got a phone call from them saying, if it's possible, will you meet up with this fellow, so-and-so, who will meet you there at 9 o'clock in the morning to take the yacht off the beach and remoor it into the Maroochy River. So off we went. We got down there at 9 o'clock. We waited, we waited, we waited, and no fellow came along. And by this time, of course, it's getting very hot. I wasn't able to go to the toilet. There was no drinking water, and we were just standing here waiting. And in the end, Cyril says, "Look, I think we'd better move this boat because the tide was coming in." Yes, yes. And here am I with the tiller, you know, just like a mixmaster, and no idea what to do. And we finished up stranded on a sandbar in the middle of the river, which was okay until the tide started to go out. And the boat's getting further and further and further, and I'm standing on this yacht, you know, going over with it, and Cyril's there with he'd rowed over with his rowboat, and he's trying to shovel it off with and he tore all the skin off his chest. He was going to move no way in the world was he going to get any help from anyone. And I'm saying, but we've got to get help. No, I can do it.
He was so proud.
In the end, I saw this yacht coming down the river and I yelled out, "Help! Help!" And he was so cross with me. And it was the fellow who was supposed to meet us. He'd gone out early because he thought we'd be right. Right? And of course, by the time we got back to our unit, we were absolutely beat. And I think it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. It was quite late. So I said, "Is that someone knocking on our door?" I said, he went to the door and they said, "Is Beryl in?" And it was a gentleman. And he thought, "Who the hell are you?" "Looking for my wife." He said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, is Beryl here?" He said, "Yes." And so he turned around to the people and said, "She's here." And they tin canned me. They were the parents from the kindergarten. They brought food and party food, and you know what tin canning's like.
No, the young ones don't know what that is, Mum.
They had
You guys missed out.
kerosene tins and noises and things like that. They made a lot of noise with tin lids and things like that. And of course they said, "Have you eaten?" We said no. He said, what kind of a wife are you? You know, you've only been married so much, and he poor. So anyway, we had a lovely, lovely time, and we finished up our honeymoon. We drove back to Sale, packed the car with all the things that would fit in the car, put the rest of the stuff into boxes and had it sent up on the carrier. And so we moved to Nambour, and we stayed in this dreadful little pokey little flat for about 6 weeks, until one of my kindy parents said, "Oh, Beryl, this big house up on the hill, Hocking Street, there's a beautiful big flat up there becoming available next week. Are you interested?" £4 a week, and that was a lot of money, because Cyril was only earning, I think, £14 a week at that stage. So anyway, up we went, paid a deposit on this big unit, and it was it was a very, very, very old Queenslander. And it was there that Sally and David were conceived and were born, and we lived there for, probably 4 years, until we had the opportunity to buy it, but because it was such an old, big timber home, we realised we couldn't afford the maintenance on it. So we said no, and the people who bought it moved into there, and they allowed us to move into the little side veranda, which was very pokey and very difficult, and every time you used the bath and pulled the plug out, it flooded the floor because there was no connection. So we reached that stage where we thought we'd bought the block of land. We thought we'd have to do something about building our own house. So we went down to Brisbane to the Housing Commission office. We told them the story that we had 2 children and I was expecting Claire. And they said, "Look, Mr. Cox, we can't help you." He said, the whole of the cupboard was massed with envelopes. He said, we'll certainly try and do what we can. But he said it could be any one of these. It could be my God, he said, this is yours. Now, I tell you, that had to be, yeah, that's right. And I mean, of all these thousands and thousands and thousands of packets of information on housing commission, it was ours. He said, I shall do it straight away. So there we were, we got it all done, and we had the house was built within, I suppose, 4 or 5 months, because those days it took a long time. That's how we started, and we had a very, very interesting time together, Cyril and I.
In an arbor town, I like to see the boats leaving at the break of dawn. I wanna live in an arbor town, surrounded by the sea, my artist free. The salty breeze and the waves, the slow pace. The salty breeze and the waves.